Hi everyone, welcome to Thirsty Thursday Meditations with Wine. I'm Elizabeth Viana, winemaker here at Chimney Rock. We thought we would bring you outdoors again for this tasting. It's a beautiful day here in Napa. We're right here in front of the winery. As you can see, the lavender knot garden is in bloom. It's absolutely gorgeous. You may hear a little bit of ambient noise, and if you start to hear too much, let us know, because then I'll adjust my volume a little bit. It's a little bit breezy. You can feel those breezes of San Pablo Bay coming through. And so you can hear the birds chirping as well. But we thought you might enjoy a little bit of Napa Valley today. I also want to let you guys know that our tasting room does continue to be closed. Tasting rooms in Napa Valley are not open yet, so we really wanted to make sure that you know that we're not open for Memorial Day, which is why we're bringing a little wine tasting to you for Memorial Day weekend. So we're off to start a nice long weekend. So we've done different themes throughout these tastings. The first one was non-cab varieties like Cab Franc, Merlot. And then we did single vineyard Cabernets in the second one. Today's theme is a little different. We're going to theme it around our club allocation, which just went out this spring. And if you're not familiar with our wine club, I can let you know a little bit about what that entails. Basically, you receive 4 bottles of amazing Chimney Rock wines 3 times a year, and you get some perks, of course. We send you this little mailer with the wines, and I write a letter and give you updates on what's going on in the vineyards. John Trolato will chime in and tell stories of the family. We usually have a recipe and then some pretty creative notes on the wine so that when you taste, you have some reference points. So we're going to taste 2 of the club allocation wines today. We're going to start with let's do a little kind of recap on how we organize these. We're going to taste through the wines first. If you have any questions about the wines, feel free to chime in while we're tasting. If you have broader questions about the winery, anything else, let's save those for the Q&A sort of at the end. So give a little history of Chimney Rock. If you haven't been to the building, this architecture is very distinct. It is actually Cape Dutch architecture, which is typical of wineries in South Africa. So if you've ever been to Stellenbosch or Franschhoek in South Africa, where the wine region is, this is very typical of the architecture. And the founding couple who built this building, the Wilsons, they'd lived in South Africa for many years. This is inspired by a winery called Meer Lust, the tasting room. So Cape Dutch, very traditional, probably the only Cape Dutch winery in all of the U.S. as far as I know. So kind of interesting. Let's start with tasting some wine. I hope you guys are all faring well at home. I know these have been challenging times. And again, I hope that this little wine meditation will help to, enjoy this sort of respite. So we're going to start with the 2013 Estate Cab. In our very first tasting, we tasted the 12. And the Estate Cab basically is, let's kind of run through the estate again. We've got 105 acres planted here in Stag's Leap District, a mix of hillside and valley floor as well. About 80% of our estate is planted to Cabernet, about 12 is Merlot, little Cab Franc, a little Petit Verdot, and a little bit of Malbec now as well. We have 2 rows of Malbec. And so the Estate Cab, to me, is meant to be sort of the ambassador to the property. It tells the story of what Cabernet did in a vintage here. So I want this to be a time machine for you. I want you to close your eyes, and we're going to smell, and I want this wine to tell you a little bit about what the 2013 vintage was. And if you're thinking, wow, 13 vintage wine for a club allocation, this is one of our library releases. So we really like to age some wine and release it later because we think there's tremendous benefit in tasting wines once they're a little bit older. And we know most consumers don't age their wine, so we do that favor for you. We store it in great conditions, and then we release the wine a few years later. So obviously 7-year-old Cabernet, the ambassador to our property. One of the things that I do that's unusual, I think, for a flagship cab here is I use a little bit less new French oak. So 50% new French, 50% used. And the reason is I really want the fruit to kind of sing in this wine so that you can get a sense for the vintage. So what was 13 like? 2013 was the first of 3 drought years that we had in Napa Valley, pretty intense drought. So barely any winter rain, really low rains, very warm spring, very warm summer, not too many heat spikes, which is fortunate. So it was just warm, but we literally were finished harvesting Cabernet here on the estate on October 8th that year. That's completely unusual. Usually Cab finishes at the end of October, maybe beginning of November. It's the latest ripening variety. So very early harvest, very warm, very ripe. So not a lot of water in the soil, right? So that gives us very small berries, lots of concentration and power. And the 13s, Chimney Rock and Stag's Leap wines generally, I think, are very approachable at a young age because they have very kind of fleshy, velvety tannins. But in 13, that was a little different. The wines really had a lot of structure, and they really benefited from a little bit of time in the bottle. The Estate Cab is a blend, so of multiple blocks, but also varieties. So this particular one is 86% Cabernet Sauvignon and 14% Merlot. Those are the 2 varieties that go into this. And as you know, for something to be called a particular variety, it has to be 75%. So if it was 75% Cab, it would be a Cab Sauv. So let's take a smell. And getting a lot of that famous blackberry that I feel we get a lot from Stag's Leap. A lot of black currant, a lot of black fruit from this vintage. There's something like a little bit savory about it as well, and a little bit of herb. And you know, I think that in Stag's Leap, one of the benefits, the cooling that we get from being at the south end of the valley, is we never get wines that are just pure fruit. There's always like layers, even in a warm year like 13. This wine to me has a little bit of like sage, and there's an element that I call almost like forest floor, which is it's just a hint, but it's a little bit of sort of a green character, not a bad green character, but it just adds a layer to it, and then maybe a little bit of a meaty character. Just super, super expressive. I mean, this wine is just super open. I think something also interesting to see, I was reading my notes from the tasting notes and tasting the wine, and the wine had changed. And I think that's something that's really important to think about when you think about wine. These bottles are kind of a living thing, right? And so there's oxygen going through that cork in very minute amounts, and the wine is always in kind of a dynamic state. It's not a static entity. And it won't taste the same today as it will a week from now or a year from now. And so when I was reading my notes, I was like, ooh, those notes don't really apply. Like, I'm getting a little bit more of this. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing to keep in mind, that wine is constantly changing. And that's why, to me, it's there's a real magic in it. You can never exactly know where a wine will be, but you know, you pop the cork and it's a moment of discovery. So I'm going to taste this right now. And that is just what I call a full-bodied Cabernet. It's still got a lot of muscle at 7 years, but definitely fleshy, velvety, not as silky as I would say the 12 was when we tasted the 12. So the 12 was a little bit more feminine, a little bit more graceful. This is almost a more masculine Cab to me in sort of nature. It's a little bit burly and muscly. And this has a lot of years to cellar. I mean, I think this wine has 20 years if you want to put it away. And I think that's pretty typical for the 13 vintage. So are we enjoying this? Do we have any comments on the wines? Any questions?
A lot of people think it's delicious. One asked if you could describe what forest floor.
Forest floor. So somebody's asking me what that descriptor forest floor. It literally is when I walk in the woods, there's a smell to the ground to me in Northern California. And actually, not just in Northern California. I remember being in a forest in France and thinking there's that forest floor. So it's almost like, think about like a mix of moss and maybe dried leaves. And it's kind of an amalgam of what you're walking on. So it's a little esoteric, I know, but I think sometimes the best way to express wine is to think of something that's personal to you. And I will often refer to something that, or people will say, oh, something that my grandmother used to cook, or something that she did at Christmas. And I think about wine descriptors as be creative. If you look in your memory bank, there is something associated with smells that's an experience. And I think that's a really cool way to kind of think about wine. So hopefully that answered your question on forest floor. Next time you walk in the woods, check it out and see if you find that scent that I'm trying to explain.
Mm-hmm. And then we have several questions on aging. So Lindsay's asking, could it be aged up to 20 more years? And then Wesley's asking, what made you decide 7 years was the right age to release it as a library wine?
Yeah. So Lindsay, you're asking, could it age another 20 years? Absolutely. I think maybe 25 or even 30. Like this is a wine that has the muscle to age. And I think I shared this with you guys at the last tasting. I tasted a 1984, 1985 Chimney Cabernet, and those wines were still alive. So this area really lends itself to ageability between acidity and sort of structure. Wesley's question was...
what made us decide to release it 7 years after
what made us
for the library
decide
wine?
to release it at 7 years? I think we want to release the wine when it's library and it's still got youth, because I think that's sort of a magical place. You kind of see the wine in transition. You still see some of the elements of youth, that's super high-powered fruit, but you're starting to see some secondary aromatics, and the tannins are starting to soften. So to me, with Cabernet, that happens somewhere between 5 to 10 years. And so I think 7 is a real sweet spot, 7 to 8 years. So that's how we decided that.
Mm-hmm. And then we have Christine is tasting the 2011, and Glenda, who messaged us earlier, is tasting the 2012. So contrasting any of those.
Yeah, those are great contrasts to 11, 12, 13. That would be a great vertical to taste. So 11, I've shared before, we had bad Bordeaux weather in Napa Valley. Literally, lots of rain early, rain during. One of the coolest years I've seen in my 22 years of making wine in Napa Valley. So the wines are, they're not as like plush and exotic and, showy as a wine like the 13 or even the 12. They're a little bit more austere, a little bit more elegant, a little bit more soft-spoken, but really beautiful. I think the 11, that's one of my favorite wines, and I've been having a lot of fun watching that one age, because I think it's going to be a really beautiful wine in older age. And it's tasting great. We actually tasted that one at one of our tastings as well. So love the 11. And those three vintages, 11, 12, and 13, are just vastly different. 12, what I say about 12 is 12 was Mother Nature's pity call for us after we had the really difficult vintage of 11. So Mother Nature went, okay, I'll throw you a really easy one. So 12 was one of those vintages that's not too hot, not too cool, normal rainfall in the winter, dry spring, lots of fruit, super graceful. So I think of 12 as very fruit forward, not as powerful in terms of tannin as the 13. And the 12 is actually tasting super elegant. You really could have a glass of that without food. It's just super silky. Whereas this 13, I think, kind of calls for a pairing of some sort, you know, whether it's a great piece of grilled steak or grilled portobello mushroom or even a burger, something to kind of soak up that tannin.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
And on the same topic, Max says that obviously you're not a lazy winemaker, but the wind is...
It's getting windy out here. I'll keep my voice up.
So, though you're not a lazy winemaker, he likes how you describe the easy versus more challenging. Did you say 2013 was a lazy winemaker year, or
13 and 12 were both lazy winemaker vintages. 11 was not. 11 was lots of nights of sleep lost, and just going to sleep, listening to the rain, and thinking, "Oh my Lord, what's going to happen tomorrow?" So yeah, 12 and 13 are lazy winemaker vintages. 11, not so much. So thanks, Max. That's a good question. So we're going to go to South Hill. Let's taste South Hill. So South Hill is actually one of our single vineyard Cabernets. It comes from the very south end of the estate, so it's just a few feet away from Tomahawk. It's kind of a hillside. It's a lower hillside. It's just under Alpine Vineyard. Pretty well-drained soils. The fruit's very powerful. We actually have it broken into 2 sub-blocks, so there's 2 different rootstocks. And one ripens early and the other ripens later, which is really interesting, but they're very complementary to each other. And it's the same clone. It's clone 337. So this wine, by contrast, is going to be 100% Cabernet. We'll talk a little bit about 17 vintage. So 17 was a interesting year. Lots of rainfall in the winter. In fact, to give you an idea, normally we get about 26 inches of rainfall in the growing season. That includes winter rain mostly, which is when it rains here in Napa. That year we got 55 inches of rain. So lots of rain, very wet. But the good part was it really was winter rain. So by the spring, things dried out. And what we want to try to do is get some stress to the grapevine so that water kind of goes away and the plant can kind of concentrate on the fruit and not the vegetative growth of the plant. So it was lots of rain in the winter and then warm and dry. So really beautiful growing season, early though. And so I want to say we had like one heat spike Labor Day weekend, which I remember is a little intense, but that was it. That was like the only really crazy thing. That was also the year of the fires in Napa, which we'll never forget, but we were mostly done harvesting by then. So South Hill was harvested on, I want to say October 6th, and it's 100% cab. This vineyard block was planted in 1995. So, what is that? I can't add right now. It's a 15-year-old block, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, 25. 25-year-old block.
Yeah.
So 25-year-old vines. First vintage we made of South Hill was 2013, and this one, it's been a great performing vineyard for a long time. It was part of the reserve program sometimes élevage, but it really started to hit its stride in like around 12, 13, and we started making a little bit of wine from there on its own. It has definitely a cooler climate personality to me. And I always talk about how the north end of Chimney Rock is kind of riper, more typical Napa, very opulent fruit, more jammy. When you get down to the south end, you're not getting the reflective heat of the Palisades, all the bedrock that lies in the mountains above us. And so you're getting more influence from the cooling of San Pablo Bay. And you just start to get more of that savory, herbal character. So South Hill, to me, is a lot of black fruit again. A bit plummy. Let's see what my notes said. Let's check what I thought back then. So I said blackberry, blackcurrant. Yeah, there's some blackberry. Some powdered cocoa, and powdered cocoa cocoa characters mocha tend to come from the oak that I use, and I use a particular Cooper here, Sylvain, that I love, that gives quite a bit of that mocha character. A little bit of vanilla, but definitely, again, I'm going to go dried herbs, and I'm going to try to find what it is. This almost has, and Cabernet can in cooler spots, a little bit of mint. So I see like a little bit of a mint or kind of anise character here. So let's taste this bad boy. That is a mouthful of Cabernet. So this is young. This 17 South Hill is definitely, I mean, I think right now, this is a hard wine to just kind of sip. You almost want a little bite. It calls for food. Definitely has a lot of aging ahead of its time. And I think it's sort of fun to see the contrast between the 13 and the 17 and how they're showing differently. And it really shows you why, you know, the patience of cellaring is worth it. If you enjoy wines that have a little bit more finesse, if you like the power that South Hill has, you know, go for it. Drink it now, because I think it's very showy. And 17, by the way, in spite of the fact that we had the fires in Napa Valley, and that was a challenging year for all of us in Napa Valley, I think it made some of the best wines we've made. It was just a great balance of complexity, fruit, and I like to say that the vines are always a reflection of what's happened around them. And I think, you know, we all suffered that year. It was a challenging year, but it was a successful year because we survived something difficult. And I feel like the wines are sort of poetic for that reason. Like that's how I see the 17s. They had a story to tell, great story to tell. So I'm I have a little soft spot for the 17s right now, just in case you're wondering. But I wanted to, since we're talking about our Palisade Society and our club members, one of the things I wanted to do is I have a little celebration. I want you guys to help me raise a glass to Sue and Mike Cooley from Arizona. They're celebrating their 43rd anniversary. Thank you for joining us today and celebrating with us. To many more. In addition, I really wanted to give a shout out to our club members, our mailing list members, our fans. We have felt such tremendous support through this kind of challenging time from all of you. And it's funny, I've been here at Chimney Rock for almost 20 years, and you really develop family-like bonds with club members. I've traveled with you guys. We've had many meals together. You've met my husband, my dog. We see each other here all the time. So we really appreciate all the loyalty that you guys have shown us. And I think there's something special about the folks who have discovered this little hidden gem that is Chimney Rock. And I think that kind of connects us all. So here's a little glass to you guys. So with that, I'm going to open up the floor for any questions that you guys have about winemaking or, you know, what's going on. I'll tell you a little bit about what's going on in the vineyards, actually. This is an exciting time. We're just going through bloom here at Chimney Rock, so that means the grapevines are flowering. Really critical moment, because this is going to determine how many berries get set per cluster. And grapevines like very steady weather during bloom. So not too hot, not too cool, no rain. Otherwise you get what's called shatter and not all the berries set. So we've had decent weather for bloom this year. I'm not going to say spectacular. We had a little bit of weird rain last week. It's kind of windy today. It's going to get a little warm this weekend. So we'll kind of see what happens. But we've had 2 big vintages. So, you know, if I know Mother Nature well, it's time for her to be a little stingy and give us less fruit. And I have a feeling that's what's going to happen. So you heard it here first. I want to give you guys a little clue into a wine that we're going to be releasing like in the next week or so that I'm really excited about. So we are releasing our first single vineyard Petit Verdot from our Canyon block. That's going to be coming up soon. So if you're on our mailing list or in the club, look out for that. We made 54 cases of it. It is so fun. And it's our first Petit Verdot. Our fans have been asking for us to make one for a long time because you all know I use Petit Verdot a lot in our Élevage blend. It's really critical, and I love the variety. We have 2 blocks on the property, and they're absolutely stellar. But so look out for Canyon Petit Verdot, which is coming out soon.
People are asking when they might see it, so look out potentially next week.
Potentially next week, yeah. Look, read your emails.
He can read all our secrets.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Another one from Max on extended maceration. Do we do any of that? How do you feel it affects the flavor of the wine?
Yeah, so I am a big fan of the extended maceration. We have a tank for every single vineyard block and extra space, so I'm never in a rush to get wine off the skins. And over the course of my tenure here, I've played a lot with less time on the skins, more time on the skins, and we just find we grow beautiful fruit, and I want to get everything that I can out of those skins. And so we typically macerate 26 up to, I've done 40 days on the skins, and that's in total. So from day 0, which is when the fruit comes in, all the way to about 40 days. And the decision about when the juice comes off the skins is based on taste. So Laura Orozco and I, my assistant winemaker, we have to taste every single tank every day. It's dreadful, but somebody's got to do it. And that magical day comes where you just feel like everything comes into balance. You know, tannin, and you have mid palate, and you just know that's the moment. So drain the juice off the skins. We go into barrel, and then we press the skins.
And I think mentioning Laura is a good transition to Wesley's question, who's asking you to speak to like the winemaking team. So it's obviously you, but who else is involved in
Absolutely.
The process?
So the team here at Chimney Rock is 6 people on the winemaking side. Myself, Laura, my assistant winemaker, Eddie Lona, our cellar master, Jorge Leon, Marin, and Leo. So we've been together for a long time. It's truly a family. Laura and I mostly work on picking decisions and blending. Now, I love to get feedback from the family as well. So I love when John Torlato comes out and tastes with me and gives me feedback, or Tony or Bill. It's really fun, I think, for them to see the wines at a younger stage, and for me to talk through new ideas with them. So they're certainly a part of kind of the brain thought behind what we're doing, and always very supportive of our ideas and what we do. And obviously, listen, it takes a village to make wine, right? So we have our farming company in addition. We now have a director of viticulture, Gaspar Roby, who's also happens to be a good friend who I went to Davis with, and he's from Argentina. I'm from Brazil. We fight a little bit about soccer, but mostly we get along. That's it. I mean, it's a pretty big team, but the winemaking team is pretty small, just 6 people.
Can you talk a little bit about the unfiltered bottles?
Talk a little bit about the unfiltered bottles. Yeah, so occasionally we love to take something that's a single vineyard. And it's amazing when you taste through a block that's divided into, say, 36 barrels. Every barrel is not the same, right? We're using different coopers. We may isolate a different part of the block. So the unfiltereds that we've done here were actually a little bit of an experiment that I'd been doing with how we drain tanks when we drain the free run. So, and it kind of evolved into what is Omega Point. So after we're done with maceration, we'll drain the free run out. And usually what I do is I leave a sump under the tank draining overnight, and we collect. So in a 12-ton fermenter, that's just enough to get us about a barrel. And so those unfiltereds have typically been the last 60 gallons that drain out of a tank from some of our best single vineyards. So we've done a Clone 7 unfiltered, we did a Tomahawk unfiltered, a Ganymede unfiltered. And it's amazing to see the difference between that single barrel and kind of the rest of the blend. And I love the ability to show that kind of focus versus kind of the entire block. So it's an exercise in, you know, I think winemakers are very analytical, and we're analyzing every detail, and sometimes you catch on to a detail that really just feels visceral and good and tastes amazing. You're like, okay, bottle that separately. And the Canyon Petit Verdot is the same thing. I mean, honestly, when we made the 17 Canyon Petit Verdot, Laura and I knew that it had to be a bottling. It's so beautiful. It's so velvety. It has like the most beautiful fruit. And the block is amazing. It's nestled between two of the back hills, and it's all bedrock right behind it. So the vines are really stressed. There's a lot of power. Wait till you see the color. I'm going on about the Petit Verdot, and you know, I shouldn't be, but oh well.
Dan wanted to make sure it's football, not soccer.
Dan? It is. It is in fact soccer. No, it's football in Brazil, Dan. But here in America, we'll call it soccer.
Judy said, unrelated to tonight's tasting, but I have two 2002 Merlots remaining from several cases I purchased. How does the 11 Merlot and the 14 compare to the 2002?
Wow. So Judy has 2002 Merlot, 2011, 2014. 2002 reminds me of 12 and 14, actually, kind of ripe, really beautiful fruit. And in fact, 2002 was the first year we made Merlot as a variety here. So that's kind of a historic bottle for us. So that's great that you have that. And I'm sure that that's tasting great because all the 2002s are going through a really great period right now. The 11, again, especially in contrast to the 14, will be quite different. 11, a little bit more austere, more focused, more elegant. 14, a little bit more lush and opulent. So it'd be interesting to taste them side by side. But again, I think 11 will be more reminiscent of Bordeaux type style wines, and 14 is more Napa Valley, just because of climate those years. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then I think we had a couple questions come in to the topic you talked about at the beginning, so I think it's a good opportunity to reiterate that we're not open.
Yeah. So we've been getting a lot of inquiries about when are you going to open? You want to come visit? We are not open yet, folks. We're sad to say. I mean, it is a gradual reopening in California, and even though there are some Napa restaurants that opened this week, tasting rooms are closed. So look to our website. We will definitely send emails out to notify people. Call ahead. We're definitely closed for Memorial Day, unfortunately. And we can't wait for things to be back to normal and to host you here. The beginning will be different than it was. I'm sure that we won't be able to host as many people as we have in the past, so it's going to be a little bit of an adjustment, but it's going to be great, and we can't wait. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. We will be having more of these. I think one of the discoveries of this is great, right? I mean, I think challenges like this period have taught us a lot of things, and we realize sometimes people can't visit. Why can't we do this together? And I think this is a thing that we're going to do even past this period, because it's an opportunity for us to connect with you guys across the country. When maybe I'm busy bottling, but I can come at the end of the afternoon, we can have a quick tasting. That's a jackhammer. With that, I'm going to say cheers. Thank you for joining us. Have a great Memorial Day weekend. Stay safe and healthy.